Still nothing. I don't want to take the time. Okay. Okay, I will then just be speaking, I guess. Yes, it's in my purse, but I think it, okay.
Or you want to move them through they have the handouts as you wish.
Yeah, that's true. You have the handout. Okay, let's just go through that rather than wasting the time.
You're good.
So the very important thing when you are talking about building multilingual workforce, meaning the workers who are providing services in English and one or two or more other languages, you need to define the roles. What exactly are they doing? And as I said, the handout number 1, lep.gov, that's where there's a question number 11 in their frequently asked questions where they're actually explaining what is the difference between bilingual employee and contracted interpreter or translator. You don't have to read it now, you can take a look, but the preferred definition for that is a person employed to use their language skills in English and another language with a linguistic proficiency in both languages appropriate to the function of their position, who also understand and shares the values of the non-English speaking community they're employed to work with and their employing agency. And again, feds are telling us that this is a direct service. We in Washington State really learned the lesson that absolutely it has to be a direct service most of the time. Very rarely we would pull the bilingual employee to do a very quick interpretation or very short translation. But the most and foremost goal of having a bilingual employee is to provide direct service with the clients who don't speak English. Models of a bilingual worker. Worker or staff classified as bilingual or multilingual on the basis that they have, first, proficiency in 2 or more languages, biculturalism, and bilingualism and or biculturalism forming identified employment criteria. So if you look at slide number 4 and take a look, what type of bilingual or multilingual workers there could be. It's either a one-on-one worker providing direct services, and then not in social service or healthcare services, but in some other situation. It can be a group educator and information provider. Actually, in DSHS, we do have those kind of roles. It's when the team is trained to do certain work. It's not one person, but several, and it's kind of an educational, or teaching people how to apply for the job. That again kind of addresses several people, and it's more or less educational or information providing function. Community worker with restricted roles, and that is they're proficient in language other than English, and they have ethnic identity for conducting specific work in the presence of a mainstream specialist. And in parentheses it says, for example, community networking to facilitate attendance. When we want to address the community speaking one certain language, we need kind of an ally, conduit, navigator who would help us to transfer this, or communicate that there would be a forum or town hall meeting or something where they can hear information that will be very helpful to them. Individual and family support worker, they require ethnic identity. It's a sensitive matter, really. For example, working with refugees to quickly engage newly arrived populations in social, health, educational, and employment services. In addition to that, in Washington State, we really found out that it's very, very beneficial to have individual service providers who are bilingual. And sometimes they're really not even very proficient in English. However, the services for elderly or disabled that they can provide without us, in addition to those services, paying for the interpreters are invaluable. So we are providing training materials in their languages. We are providing interpreters for kind of testing them, and then we're entrusting them to provide those services to their friends, community members, family members, and this way we're kind of cutting on services. We really feel that we need them more than they need us, because they really help us to provide quality services after we train them, but we cut on the cost of having interpreter, like, I don't know, 24/7 with somebody who requires that. Sometimes we have this, we call them individual providers. We have them in 2 or 3 shifts, and still it's kind of more fiscally responsible than doing it some other way or sending them to the institution. Okay, in slide number 5, we can read how this whole thing came to life. In 1991, the Department of Social and Health Services, DSHS in Washington State, initiating an effort to certify its bilingual staff, social services, medical interpreters, and translators working for DSHS throughout its many divisions and programs. This effort was culmination of lawsuit and civil rights complaints brought against DSHS. And you can read further on your own on that. So that's where I would like you to take a look at but what does it mean to be certified? And there's a very good material that DOJ prepared saying, what does it mean to be a certified linguist? Because one certification differs from another. It's really very important to know what exactly was tested. It's also important to know when the person was tested and has the person been using the skills, because certification 20 years ago doesn't mean that the person, if the person didn't use those skills, is still qualified to do the work. And again, I don't want you to do all the reading, but those of you who are really interested in building this program, this will be very, very helpful for you. Not necessarily in this kind of a context, but I decided to include our guidelines on hiring a non-certified qualified interpreter. And sometimes it can be really very necessary, especially if it's very difficult to find, language with somebody who went through the certification or screening testing. So Department of Social and Health Services, and I worked on that too. It was a group effort. We actually kind of got this questionnaire, and it says that if 4 or more answers are positive, then you can be certain that this person can be used. So again, this is kind of a helpful tool for those of you who will be facing this kind of situations. How do you know if you can trust this person to do the interpretation? So look at how old they were when they came here, how many years they've been in the United States, what grade level did you finish in their home country, and so on and so forth. So you can just keep it for your references for the future. And now we'll go into exhibit that actually talks about DSHS testing and cluster positions. And this is something that, again, didn't appear overnight. But as you can see, because we were required to test both bilingual employees, interpreters, and translators for the DSHS services that DSHS provides, and the requirement was that those individuals would need to be very proficient in the language, but also familiar with the services different administrations within the department provide, that they would be very familiar with the forms that the department sends out. with the terminology that is used, and that they would have the qualities of the workers in each position. So that to understand that, first and foremost, the person would, for example, new hire, would go through the regular application process, resume, filling the application, and so on and so forth, then go through the 1 or 2 or 3, interviews, depending on, the pool of the candidates. And we clustered or put in the groups the positions that you can see, cluster 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. At the top, you will see that it's either bilingual employee or bilingual employee interpreter. At the time when the tests were developed, we needed both. Now, 25 years later, I will tell you that we almost completely separated those two roles. And as I talked earlier about, sometimes for the bilingual employee, act as an interpreter can be viewed as a conflict of interest. So we want to avoid even a perception of that. So in cluster 1, as you can see, mostly it's those who work in the offices or front desk, lobby, kind of reception people. They're taking cluster 1 test, and it's oral only. They do not do any exercise in writing because we do not expect them to have anything to do with written materials. They're basically greeting, they're basically referring, they are explaining where to go or who to see, where to meet their caseworker, and so on and so forth. And then there's a cluster that has to do more with the numbers, as you see, financial workers, workforce specialist, medical assistant specialist, and they take the same oral test as cluster 1, but the written exercise is based on the terminology and on the terms and on the lingua that they're mostly using in their positions. And I have a little cheat sheet on my phone here, just to tell you how the test was developed. And very many people were included. There was a whole committee, and just so that you understand what specialists we needed to create the test and validate the test, there were consultations with human resources, consultation with interpreter program managers or LEP advisors, and we have a body of LEP advisors. We meet every other month. I'm chairing that committee. Now it's joined DSHS, HCA, and HBE committee. So just a couple of years ago, we revised those tests. And last year, I did not participate, but it was revised again. Because as you know, in every agency, the names of the programs change. Some programs kind of, fade out. New programs appear. So we need to make sure that we still adhere to the terminology, that our bilingual workers or interpreters that we use are familiar with those terms. So we need to test candidates, in the comprehension and understanding of those. We consulted with specialists in related fields of practice. There was an analysis of class specifications and specification questionnaires, survey on bilingual positions, development of test guidelines, development of proficiency guidelines, development of test specifications, review of related written materials circulated in DSHS and medical settings, research of other related written materials, item development, item review by related specialists, test review by stakeholders and other interested groups, test revision, pilot testing, and test validation. And believe me, the unions were with us every step at a time.
Got it.
Huh?
Got it. Hope you're not done yet.
Almost.
Tell me where to stop.
So it should be number 4 at this point, or number 8. Well, yeah, I'm almost at the end, yes, because the last one, and you have it in your packets also, There are other testing, language proficiency testing resources. If you don't want or don't have funds to develop tests that your program will be administering, then there are entities outside, and you can send candidates through those testing entities and get the, some kind of evidence that those people are qualified to act as bilingual employees or contracted interpreters, translators, or social service or medical interpreters. And again, we can't cover everything, but in Washington State, our unions are requiring that those employees who, in addition to the main requirements of the position, use any additional skill, that they have a pay differential. And that is in our statutes, it's in our legislation, it's in our collective bargaining agreement. And we have like different groups of specifications, and we have a list of those that are saying assignment pay, and in different groups, there's different ranges that are added to the base salary. So we have to adhere to that also. And as I said, we cannot answer all the questions. Maybe this topic does not pertain to every one of you, but again, those who are interested, you have like 3 PowerPoint presentations. On each of them, there's my name, my email address, and my phone number. So don't hesitate to contact me, and it will not be just me answering the questions. We can get a group of those people who were involved at the very beginning of creating this program. Luckily, we still have some of them still working, maybe not in DSHS, but in the state of Washington, so I can connect you, and we can have webinars, we can have discussions, we can have email exchanges, so just, we learn from each other. So just networking and creating relationships, both sides will benefit from it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Elena. I apologize. There was
No, that's okay.
crossed
right?
emails, but everyone was able to follow along with your handouts, yeah? Okay.
And just to clarify, there are 2 handouts, so there's quite a bit of information available through the handouts, and Elena has indicated she's open for questions as well, and hopefully we'll have a few minutes for that after our next presenter. Of course, one of the key words that we heard is the unions were involved, and that's something that maybe if you have a neighbor who's in the union, you can start talking to them about the importance of bilingualism in the workforce, letting them know that this is something the state is looking at as an important step for the future. Okay, our next presenter. Thank you.
So while the presentation comes up, what was the number one thing that I wanted you to take away from yesterday's presentation about New Mexico? The number one thing.
That you're in U.S.
That we are part of the U.S. Yes. Okay, that's one thing. Number 2, Department of Justice actually ranked New Mexico as the number 2 state in terms of providing language access services for limited English proficient individuals. So we're very happy and honored to be in that position, and we're not too unhappy that we lost to Hawaii, so that's fine. So in terms of my presentation, oh, it's already there. Okay. So
She's doing it on purpose.
So are you feeling annoyed, frustrated, confused? What am I trying to do? Well, this is what limited English. See, he's confused. So this is really what limited English proficient individuals and deaf individuals go through whenever they come to our courts, and there's nobody there to help them. So in New Mexico, we really took action on the Department of Justice requirement of providing access at all points of contact and at the first point of contact, right? So the focus of today's presentation is not going to be court interpreters, what we do inside the courtroom. We use certified interpreters, qualified interpreters. There's no question about that, but it's more like what do we do outside the courtroom without bilingual staff? Just to remind you of our linguistic composition, 36.04% of the population speak another language at home. Out of the non-English languages that are used in New Mexico, 78% is Spanish. And you'll have the chart there. And then we have Navajo, Keres, Zuni. And these are all, did I kill the microphone?
This should be okay.
Is it okay? Okay. So we really took a look at who are we serving and what do we need to do to better serve them outside the courtroom again. So what is the legal basis for providing access outside the courtroom? Well, of course, Title II of ADA, Title VI of Civil Rights Act, the executive order, but also our Supreme Court rules do cover the use of bilingual staff, specifically for this purpose. And again, the Department of Justice policy of providing equal access at all points of contact. So what type of resources we developed? Well, outside the courtroom, we have the I Speak cards to identify the language, on-demand remote interpreting services. In terms of phone, telephonic interpreting services, we use about 1,000 minutes per month in a variety of languages, and we're piloting a video remote interpreting for a self-help center at the Metro Court for sign language, for those who do not request accommodations ahead of time, but to have something that goes in parallel. It's worth mentioning that in New Mexico, interpreters for sign language, we require licensing along with certification. So it is considered a misdemeanor to actually interpret in any way if you're not certified and licensed in the state. We also have multilingual signage. We have it in Spanish, Vietnamese, Navajo. The truth is most Navajo speakers cannot read Navajo, and if they can read Navajo, they're very fluent in English. But we really wanted to recognize the Navajo language and the Navajo culture by including that there. And last but not least, the bilingual staff. And so back in 2009, let me give you a little bit of background. We started with the New Mexico Center for Language Access, which is our training branch, and we started doing actually medical and legal interpreting programs along with training for bilinguals in the medical field and the legal field. We worked with the university, with the hospital, UNM hospital, that's the hospital of the University of New Mexico. We had an internship. Our candidates had to get all types of shots and vaccinations and go through training. It was very complex. In the end, we transitioned to the New Mexico judiciary, and now we are focusing only on court interpreting and legal interpreting and anything that has to do with language access in the courts. Our Supreme Court rules were approved in 2010. That's when we incorporated all the language on the bilingual employees. So all the training that I'm going to go over is done through the training branch. That's the New Mexico Center for Language Access. So the New Mexico Supreme Court rules define language access specialist, a bilingual employee of the New Mexico judiciary who is recognized in writing by the Administrative Office of the Courts as having successfully completed the New Mexico Center for Language Access Specialist Certification Program and is in compliance with related continuing education requirements. So that's the definition that we have. Our office is part of the Administrative Office of the Courts. In recognition of having been trained and certified by our office, the bilingual employees also received a pay increase. Our administration approved this back in 2009, and this is what it says. The Judiciary Employee Manual defines the compensation increase for bilingual personnel as follows. A certified bilingual employee shall be given an increase of $1 per hour in addition to an employee's regular hourly rate of pay. This increase shall be in addition to the employee's base pay. The increased compensation required for a certified bilingual employee shall be funded within the judicial entity's appropriation. Basically, the courts and human resources, they work together in terms of we give human resources the updated list. We have a directory for every bilingual employee who's certified and in compliance with CEUs. Human resources shares that with either the human resources department at each court or the court managers as it applies so that they can get the pay increase. So what does the training and certification process looks like? It's a 12-week online instructor-led program. And we start with an application process. We look at skill, proficiency in the language. So are they able to read, speak, and understand the language? Of course, with the exception of Navajo, most Navajo speakers will not read or write the language, so we do make an exception there because we still have the need to serve that population. Same goes for other native languages. And then we'll look at what type of demand is there in the court, right? And the truth is we welcome everybody, so we're really committed to training individuals. So we do give priority to the courts that need it the most, but we try to accommodate everybody. That's how we've increased the number of trained bilingual employees. In terms of continuing education requirements, we provide webinars throughout the year, and they need 4 CEUs. That's 4 hours of training every year. We also started doing a symposium back like 4 years ago, I think, which has been very successful. I don't know if you're able to see those pictures, but we get about 60 people coming to our symposium, which is great because it's a great learning opportunity, you know, and they share experience, and it's just very inspiring to see that the work and how committed these individuals are. Many of the bilingual employees who take the training may not get that pay differential because the court might not have the money, but they still take the training because they believe that this is the right thing to do. And that is amazing to see, that people are committed to serve their community. So I spoke about the pay differential. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So like I said, we've certified about 100, I think it's grown with the last cohort, over 100 certified employees throughout the state, in magistrate, district, and metro courts, and mostly Spanish, but we do have 3 for Navajo, 1 for Mandarin, and 1 for Polish. And just to give you an example of how we use the Polish, I mean, Polish it comes up maybe, I don't know, like once a year, twice a year. So we don't really have court interpreters or interpreters, period, in our state. And so this person was she's great. I mean, she has great bilingual skills. She works in human resources at the Supreme Court building. I've been telling her, you have to sign up for this, you'll be great. Well, she did. And all of a sudden, we got a DUI case that had, they had a court order well, the person was court ordered to go to, I'm sorry, I'm jet lagged. He had to go to driving school at Metro Court. And so it was either I fly somebody from another state and spend thousands of dollars, or I use this person who's a certified bilingual person who went through the training. I know she's bilingual, and we gave her all the materials. She prepared for it, and it was very successful. I mean, the person got access. She now wants to pursue court interpreting, so she'll probably leave the judiciary to pursue court interpreting. But in any case, that's how we put them to use, so that they can, continue working on their skills and serving the judiciary. In terms of the impact, our annual report included this quote from one of our language access specialists for Navajo, and I'll read it to you. She said, "An elderly Navajo couple have been working pro se, that's self-represented, in a guardianship case. They stated that it's not so intimidating to come to court to handle their family issues. I am thankful to be able to assist Navajo-speaking parties and customers. I am confident the people are receiving the same level of service as English-speaking customers." And that was Charlene. She is from the 11th Judicial District, where Navajo is really one of the languages that we provide court interpreting services for quite frequently on a weekly basis. So this is the training that we do that is instructor-led. It has all the continued education requirements, and it also has the screening process at the beginning, and it's more extensive. In 2012, we received, we applied and got a grant from the State Justice Institute to create another training for bilingual employees that specifically addresses language access outside the courtroom. What we did is we took a different approach. This is not instructor-led. This is a downloadable training suite, and it's supported by the National Center for State Courts. It's also supported by the Language Access Advisory Committee of COSCA, that's the Council of State Court Administrators. And it had a multi-state advisory committee as well. And the training suite has 3 modules. A fundamentals module that's for everybody on the fundamentals and basics of language access. A bilingual skills building module in 2, it's available in Spanish and language neutral for other languages. And also it has a bilingual skills assessment that is optional. So we developed the curriculum along with the technology and the software itself. So that's what, I put some samples of the screens, and you will see Debbie there on the right. So the fundamentals module has everything that relates to the basis of the legal basis and what court interpreters do, what bilingual employees can do, what they shouldn't do, limitations of practice, cultural competency, etc. And then we have expert commentary from our colleagues around the country, and one of them was Debbie. At the bottom left, you'll see it's interactive, so that suite is interactive and it has a scenario. It's like, what would you do in this situation? So we're trying to prompt the employees to think about, why would this be wrong? And then we have expert commentary saying, well, this is wrong because, or you got it right because, right? So we're trying to to make people think about why we do what we do. And that fundamentals module is also, we separated that from the suite because it's what most states want and what we all need, and we can use it very easily, and it's only in English. Now, what you see on the right at the bottom is an exercise for site translation, actually, for the bilingual skills building module. So we do train our bilingual employees to do simple site translation, for example, or to do short consecutive interpretation if they have to help maybe a colleague, the self-help center, and the LEP. So they do direct communication, and they do very limited interpretation. The software that we developed actually allows for the candidate to record themselves and then compare the rendition with a proposed translation. And so that way they can assess how they're doing. So it has a self-assessment tool. And it runs in simultaneous mode, site translation, and it also has consecutive interpreting exercises. We don't do simultaneous for bilingual staff, but we are using the same platform to do the orientation that I was telling you about yesterday for core interpreters, and we have a version also for native languages. So what are the lessons learned? Well, again, like I said yesterday, setting priorities and having an action plan. Being creative to overcome challenges. We are very challenged in terms of the funding that we have in our program in New Mexico. So, for example, with the core interpreter orientation, I really wanted to do that, and I bet there's other states who want this. So, made a few calls, and it turned out that that was the case. And so we're all pulling together our resources and our expertise. Everybody has something that's valuable, right, and that we can share and learn from. And that way, we're creating this orientation. And so using collaborative approach and using technology to provide, entry-level training or online training for interpreters or bilingual employees, that has been very useful to us. I will say again what I said yesterday. Nothing of what we do would be possible without the support that we have from the Supreme Court. They've been extremely supportive of all our endeavors. Like you saw, it's in our Constitution, right? We feel very strongly about providing access. So there's a historical component there as well. And then as the program grows, pieces fall into place and resources are put into use. Language access specialists are committed people. We're creating a code of ethics for them. And a lot of the resources that we created perhaps 10 years ago or 7 years ago, we're using them in ways that we didn't think about at the time. So I hope that was helpful.
Thank you very much.
Mahalo.
We really owe a lot to these two women who have brought us so much of their experience. I'd like to thank them again for their input and their sharing. We have one question. If you have other questions, please feel free to write on a note and send them up. The first question is, can bilingual employees demand compensation for their interpretation services? And I think that basically is part of their job. Is that correct?
They don't need to. Oh, can you hear me?
Did you kill him?
You killed it. No, no, they don't need to demand because this is the law. It's automatic. If the person is identified as a bilingual employee, if the bilingual skill is a required skill, then the added differential is just worked through the HR. It's just a given. All they need to show is that they meet the qualifications for that position, And on top of that, that they pass the bilingual employee test within the group, or as we call it, cluster, for that position.
And that, because it's part of what they're doing, then that also is part of their assessment when they go get a job review?
Yes, correct. And yes, as I think I mentioned yesterday or today, it doesn't stay with the bilingual employee forever. It used to be some years ago, and we learned the lesson, because sometimes the demographics change and the need is no longer there. So now the hiring authorities or the supervisors are required to assess it every year, because every year at least state employees within DSHS, HCA, and I think HB, Health Benefit Exchange, also go through the evaluation. So at the time of the evaluation, the decision is made whether this requirement continues or it's withdrawn.
Okay, thank you. And New Mexico is a little bit different, maybe because you have interpreters per se? Or?
Right. The reality is they very seldom interpret. They do mostly is direct communication. Yeah.
And when they've been going through the program so that they're trained and they have their certificate from the state, do they also have that as part of their performance review?
As part of human resources, you mean?
So I guess there's an annual performance review. So that's part of their
what we
review.
do is we update our directory every year, and we send that to human resources. And human resources takes care of the compensation adjustment
Got it.
every year.
Got it. Thank you. So if your questions are coming, I see Tarina looking. But I was hoping to actually ask, have you seen effects throughout the community that maybe there's a change in the way the community is engaging with the services? You see some benefits that are beyond just serving the individuals?
New Mexico has a lot of heritage speakers. And so the bilingual employees that mostly serve our community have had a family member who at some point didn't get access, that at some point had trouble, and now we have that service. And in fact, the father of one of our coordinators went to the self-help center and was able to get help. He doesn't speak English, and he got help through one of the persons there who's certified as a bilingual employee, and he was very happy. So I do think that, for example, with smaller communities and with Native American communities, I think there's an outreach component there, like we care, we want to serve you. And that also translates into individuals, there's more people coming because now they know that that service is available, but that's a responsibility as well, right?
Yes. And in Washington?
Well, of course, through the years, we saw that communities in certain language group prefer to go to the community service office and specifically to the specialist who speaks their language. However, there's always two sides to the coin, and sometimes certain communities become a little too comfortable with certain worker and want to work with them. I, in the beginning of my career, actually worked as a refugee and immigrant social worker, and I also helped some financial workers because I was kind of very familiar with the different types of the visas that people come on, and they were consulting me, and we created good working experiences, and some Spanish-speaking workers told me that clients come and then they, seeing that the person understands their language, kind of start wooing them in helping them to get benefits just because they speak the same language. So there's always not just one side to the coin. So there's a fine line. There's some red flags, and we believe that our bilingual workers are still state stewards, and they're doing the best diligence that they can.
Okay, thank you. Tarina, did we have any? None from the floor? Okay, very good. So the other place that I was hoping we might talk a little bit about is, do you have a pipeline do you have a place where you recruit for these employees? Do they just happen to appear and you're lucky to have them? How do you find these important people?
Well, in Washington State, it's through the careers.wa.gov and certain position requirement. There's on the announcement, there's an indication that special skills, for example, Spanish required. So that's how they know. And usually it's then very quickly spread. You know, it's kind of a word of mouth. Everybody starts sending it to everybody they might know, including me. I even send it to some of retirees saying that, oh, you may know somebody, you know the nature of the services, so maybe you know younger generations who are just out of college and thinking about state service, and plus they're also bilingual, so please let them know.
In our case, remember, we try to use the resources that we have in the judiciary. Once they are employees and they have been employees of the judiciary for a year and they go through that probationary period, then they can start taking the training. But I think it's a matter of seeing what type of language distribution you have within the judiciary. There's 2 CARA speakers I found out recently in our Supreme Court building. Well, guess who am I going to try to get into the program, right?
Yes.
Just like the Polish lady.
Yes.
And so it's really looking at what type of resources you have. You might have people who have bilingual skills that you could be able to use for that purpose.
So pretty much the people who are within the system seem to be providing the resources. They're there. They're already in the system.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, and in our state, the way we look at it, first and foremost, the person needs to be qualified for that position.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So whatever the requirements might be, education, experience, or, both, and on top of that, then we're screening them for their language skills.
Yeah. And that's a really good point. Like, in our case, they have to have contact with the public. There was somebody from IT who wanted to, he works with computers, I know that. So no, you don't really need this training. I know you're bilingual and that's great, but you work with computers. So that's also, what is it that they actually do within their work.
Yeah. And there were several points that you brought up, so I'm going to continue to ask unless anybody else has a question. The question of written language, this is something that's come up a couple of times. In terms of certification, do you have a way of determining whether written language is necessary? I think it might have been Paula, you mentioned that because the native languages don't have a written version, and yet we talked about translating vital documents. So I'm wondering, how do you balance that? The native language doesn't have a written language, but the people who live in this country need to use a written version of their language if they're going to, or something like that. I'm not sure how to.
For anything that has to do with vital documents or any court-related document, we only use certified translators. That's ATA certified translators. For Navajo, we have a great translator that is our go-to translator. For our bilingual employees do not put anything in writing. They can't. They just can't. Now, we are working on the scribing policy and trying to get the Supreme Court to actually approve an amendment to one of the rules so that we can actually take forms that are filled out in other languages. Pleadings, there really is no need because we can take them. We have to take them, yes. And we do, but we just wanted clarity in that rule. And after 2 years of work and research and piloting, how we're going to handle and say, okay, well, we have, we'll do it. And we are doing it. It's just that it's not uniformed in all courts. When you look at the rule, it's like, well, we actually don't need to do anything because it's already there. We just wanted clarity. But no, they can't put anything in writing. And there is an issue with literacy. What happens when somebody comes and is not able to read a form. So the language access specialists are able to help them in sight translating those. And there's like an affidavit that they sign so that they have their name and they know that this person helped that person filled out the form. So that's about to be approved by our Supreme Court, and it's a new scribing policy that we have.
And that would be somebody who had done the training, the online training, or that would be somebody who has an additional...
Well, what happens is for literacy, I mean, it could happen, it's mostly English
Yes.
individuals. And then sight translating of documents that are outside the courtroom, if they're not translated, then the language access specialist can help them with that.
Well, our bilingual employees do not translate, only on very short, like making a note, for example, for the next appointment, making a note for the person to remember if they just cannot read English. But we use, as I explained here, contracted translators, and we require for that process to have one linguist who does original translation and second linguist of the equal qualification to do the review. So to do that for bilingual employees, we would have to have at least two of them, and at the same time, they would need to pass DSHS translator test, not just the bilingual employee in the group of the clusters that we have. So no, we don't practice it.
Thank you very much. I want to make sure we stay within our time. And again, I'd like to ask you to express your thanks for Paula and for Elena.